On May 14, 1983, at 1:17 in the morning, a California Highway Patrol officer pulled over a car on Interstate 5 near Mission Viejo. The driver had been swerving. Routine stop. Suspected DUI. The officer approached the passenger side. He saw a man sitting perfectly still. He knocked on the glass. Nothing. He opened the door. The passenger was dead. The driver looked up at the officer and said, "How's my friend?" They found it in his car, a single piece of paper, white, folded, the edges worn from being handled, 61 entries, handwritten in code, words like jail out, Marine, New Year's Eve, 2-in-1 beach, EDM dog. Investigators called it the scorecard. The press called it the death list. The families of the missing called it the only thing standing between them and the truth. And 40 years later, that list has still not given up all its secrets. When Orange County homicide investigators first decoded that paper, they matched entries to victims. Some were easy, EDM, Edward Daniel Moore, murdered December 1972, case closed. Others were impossible, nicknames with no face behind them, locations with no body, entries that pointed to men who had simply disappeared, men whose families had been told nothing, men the system had not yet found. Randy Kraft was convicted of 16 murders. Investigators believe he killed at least 67. The gap between those two numbers is 51 people. 51. That is not a statistic. That is 51 mothers who never got a phone call. 51 fathers who still don't know. 51 names that were never spoken in a courtroom, because the man who wrote them down has never said a word. Randy Stephen Kraft sat through 13 months of trial. He heard testimony about bodies, about photographs, about a coded paper that prosecutors argued represented a human being for every line, and he showed nothing. Judge Donald McCartan, the man who sentenced him to death, sat across from him for a year, and later said, "I didn't see any remorse, feelings, or regret. It was like he was in another world." He was sentenced to death in November 1989. That was 36 years ago. He is still breathing. Here is the thing that nobody says loudly enough about the Randy Kraft case. The system had him. Multiple times. Before the bodies piled up, before the scorecard, before the list grew to 61 entries, and the system let him walk. March 1970. A 13-year-old runaway named Joseph Fancher stumbles into a bar in Belmont Shore, California. He is barefoot. His stomach is full of pills and alcohol. He had been drugged and assaulted by an older man who had taken him home. Fancher led police back to the apartment. They went in. They found the drugs. They found the evidence. They had everything. They didn't have a warrant. The evidence was thrown out. No charges were filed. Randy Kraft went back to his life. The first recorded victim connected to Randy Kraft died on a highway in October 1971. 13 months after that apartment. 13 months after the system had him in its hands and dropped him. March 29th, 1975. Kraft lures 2 young men, Keith Crotwell and Kent May, into his car from a Long Beach parking lot. He gives them beer and Valium. He drives aimlessly. Kent May loses consciousness. Witnesses see Kraft push him from the moving vehicle. Those witnesses reported it. Keith Crotwell was never seen alive again. His skull was found months later near the Long Beach Marina. Kraft was questioned. He said he gave them a ride and dropped them off at a cafe. They had no hard evidence to hold him. He walked. Between 1975 and his 1983 arrest, Kraft is believed to have killed at least 30 more people. This is what makes the Randy Kraft case something more than a story about a monster. It is a story about a system that could not see what was in front of it. In the 1970s, 3 separate serial killers were operating simultaneously in Southern California. Kraft, William Bonin, and Patrick Kearney. All 3 targeted young men along freeways. All 3 were active at the same time, and investigators, overwhelmed, under-resourced, working without DNA technology, could not distinguish between them. Bodies were misattributed. Evidence was contaminated. Cases went cold that should have been hot, and Kraft kept driving. Every time the system fumbled, Kraft found another young man with his thumb out on the side of the road. Let's talk about what the scorecard actually is when you strip away the true crime language. It is a list of people who had families, who had mothers and brothers and friends who noticed when they stopped calling, who have spent decades being told, "There is no new information at this time." For decades, some of Kraft's suspected victims had no names. They were John Does, filed and shelved, unknown men found on roadsides, their identities as cold as their cases. Then science caught up. In 2022, the Orange County Sheriff's Department submitted tissue samples from a John Doe found in 1974 to a private forensic genealogy lab. Investigators built a DNA profile. They searched databases. They built a family tree. In November 2023, 49 years after his body was found, that John Doe got his name back. Michael Ray Schlicht, 17 years old, from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, last seen by his sister in April of 1974. She had been waiting for nearly half a century, and in May 2025, Oregon State Police announced that another victim, Larry Eugene Parks, 30 years old, a Vietnam veteran, had been identified after 45 years as a John Doe along Interstate 5. Investigators are confident Randy Kraft is responsible. 2 names, 2 families, 2 lifetimes of not knowing. Returned, finally. Not by a confession, not by a court, but by the patience of forensic scientists working cases that the system had long since filed away. The scorecard has 61 entries. Kraft was convicted of 16 murders. 2 of those 16, Eric Church and Terry Gambrell, are not clearly represented on the list at all, which means some entries on that list may belong to men who have never been found. Men whose families have been living in a specific kind of hell. Not the hell of knowing their son is dead, but the hell of not knowing anything at all. Kraft knows what every entry means. He has always known. And he has never said. He has had 36 years on death row to decide whether to give those families the only thing he could still give them, the truth. He has chosen every single day not to. In 2012, retired Orange County homicide detective Dan Salcedo made the drive to San Quentin. He had spent years reconstructing Kraft's crimes. He had read every file, traced every route, stood at every dump site. He knew the case better than almost anyone alive. He wanted to look Kraft in the eye. He wanted to give him a chance to talk. What he found was a frail old man, shackled at the arms and legs, shuffling into an interview room. The height was still listed at 5'10". He was visibly smaller than that. The hair was gone. The mustache was gone. Whatever presence he'd had in that courtroom, gone. Detective Salcedo would later say, "It's weird, when you look at him there's nothing memorable. He's not the prototypical media version of what a killer looks like." The interview lasted 30 minutes. Kraft complained that he had been railroaded. He refused to discuss any victim. And then he wished cancer on the lead prosecutor and the lead investigator who had built the case against him. Detective Salcedo looked at him and said, "They are both doing very well and living fulfilled lives. Randy Kraft has been on death row since 1989. California has not executed a single inmate since 2006. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom imposed a formal moratorium on executions. As of the filming of this documentary, Kraft is 81 years old. He is alive. He eats. He sleeps. He wakes up every morning in a cell he has occupied for over 3 decades. The families of his victims do not have that kind of certainty. Some of them are still waiting for a body. Some of them are still waiting for a name. Some of them died waiting. In the years after his conviction, Kraft filed a lawsuit against author Dennis McDougal, who had written Angel of Darkness, one of the most detailed accounts of the case. Kraft sued for $62 million. He claimed the book had damaged his reputation and this is exact, hurt his prospects for future employment. A man convicted of 16 murders, on death row, suing a journalist for $62 million over his employment prospects. The lawsuit failed. Justice in the Randy Kraft case is not coming from a courtroom. It is not coming from a confession. It is not coming from the man himself. It is coming from cold case investigators submitting decades-old tissue samples to forensic genealogy labs. It is coming from distant relatives submitting their DNA to ancestry databases and unknowingly helping detectives build a family tree around a John Doe who has been lying in a county file for 45 years. It is slow, it is incomplete, and it is the only thing still moving. There are entries on that scorecard that have never been solved. Jail out, Angel, Euclid, Iowa, Long Beach investigative records still reference unmatched entries. Marxertes, state police have open cases. Michigan has unsolved homicides from the early 1980s that have never been publicly connected. The man who can solve every one of those entries is alive. He is 81. He has a cell. He has meals. He has time. And every year he lives without talking is another year of family waits. On May 12, 1989, an Orange County jury found Randy Stephen Kraft guilty on 16 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom erupted. Families wept. One father screamed at Kraft as he was led away. But in the rows behind the families of those 16, there was no one, because the other 51 had no seat in that courtroom. Their names were not in the indictment. Their mothers were not in the gallery. Their fathers did not get to hear a verdict. Many of them still don't have one. There is a version of this story where the system works, where a warrant gets signed in 1970 and a killer is stopped before he starts, where a witness statement in 1975 leads to an arrest, where 3 separate serial killers operating on the same freeway don't spend a decade confusing the investigators chasing all of them. That version of this story doesn't exist. What exists is this: a man who kept a list, who coded every name, who constructed a private record of his crimes, so methodical, so deliberate, that investigators have spent 40 years trying to read it. A man who handed investigators the only map to the full truth and made sure they couldn't follow it. Randy Kraft turns 81 years old today. March 19th, 2026. He is alive. He has never confessed to a single killing. He has never given a name. He has never looked at a family and told them where to find what they are looking for. The list solved nothing because the man who wrote it decided it wouldn't. 61 entries, 16 convictions, 51 questions, and a killer who plans to die before he answers a single one.